it had a long journey. It was sort of 10 years from seed to fruition, and it evolved and went through a lot of phases and changes in its journey. Originally, I was a producer on it, and Graham Yost was writing and was going to direct it. I don't know if his shows like Justified and The Americans and Band of Brothers and everything have reached Australia, but he's Sneaky Pete. He's made a few amazing things.
Yeah.
And so Graham was going to direct, and he ended up getting really busy on Justified and had to step up the project. And when he did, he looked at me and said, "You should direct it." And I thought, what the fuck are you talking about? I've never directed in my life. I don't know what I'm doing. And, but he knew that I'd been spending a lot of time up in the Arctic and with the community and in the casting process. And I think he just felt like, I guess he saw something I didn't see yet. And the truth is I'd always wanted to direct. I just hadn't had, I directed a little bit of theater years ago, and I was an actress. But I kind of went into producing because that's what I saw other women doing. And I think it took me a while to realize I could step behind the camera. So I actually went and made a short in the Arctic. And then from that, I felt like I had enough confidence to step into directing the Grizzlies. But the story came to me because Jake Steinfeld, who started Major League Lacrosse in the United States, had seen an ESPN news piece and had sent it to his buddy Steven Spielberg, who sent it to his buddy Frank Marshall, who is one of the producers on the project. And Frank gave it to Zan Devine, who's another producer, and eventually it came to me. And I think all of them felt like this was such a worthy story, but they were also really big producers working on other projects, and they needed a producer to actually do the kind of day-to-day heavy lifting of developing it. So I started out producing what I thought was an inspiring sports movie, and the journey of realizing when I went up to the Arctic for the first time that it was a part of Canada I'd never seen. I'm from Toronto, from a city, and I hadn't been to the Arctic, and I'd never spent meaningful time with Indigenous people in my country. So it was a huge, massive wake-up call when I got up there, and I realized there was no way to tell this particular story without finding partners and really leaning into the collaborative experience of making the film. So words like, and I'm aware that Australia is really trying to do a lot of its own work, repair work, like we all have to do. All of us settler colonizers have to make up for a really shitty, fucked up history. So as Canada has been kind of evolving that conversation over the past 10 years, I don't think we were thinking so much when I first began this movie about the importance of perspective and who was telling stories as much as we are today. And honestly, I don't think I would make this movie today. I wouldn't direct it. But 10 years ago, it was a different film, and it was in the time I was looking for Indigenous partners early on when I realized I couldn't tell this story authentically without Indigenous partners. But it was trying to find an Indigenous partner who would work with me. And I struggled in the beginning, and I met this woman, Stacey Aglek McDonald, who was a young filmmaker in the Arctic, Inuit. And I thought she would be great to partner with. And I kept trying to call her and get her attention, and she was ignoring me. And I finally met someone who met her, and they said, "Oh yeah, Stacey doesn't like white people coming from the South making movies in the North. So you probably don't want her. And I thought, then I'm not going to give up. That's exactly who I want, because if I can get her on board and she's willing to collaborate and work on it, then maybe we won't fuck it up. So that's what happened. And I eventually wore her down, and she brought on a partner, Alethea Arnacook-Burrell. And between those two women, they completely opened my eyes to many things. But one of the biggest being, if they were going to produce the movie, they also wanted to make sure that that it was more than just making a film, that making a film in an Indigenous community has an impact beyond just the film, and that we had to make sure we were doing things that were going to be lasting, to not be repeating the pain of our ancestors. It's a history of a lot of white people coming north, taking stuff and leaving. And so obviously I didn't want to be that. And so they came aboard and have been amazing guides and collaborators and teachers, and patient with my stumbling through learning about Inuit culture. But we did things like make sure that on every single department there was an Indigenous trainee, someone from the North who would learn a skill, but also be knowledgeable to impart wisdom to that team, to make sure there was authenticity in every single department, from hair and makeup to camera. We did a huge casting process. We wanted every kid in the Arctic. It was impossible to sort of call a casting director in New York and Toronto and say, find us the best 15-year-old Inuit actors. Not because they don't exist, but because they hadn't been found, because there hadn't been opportunities for them. So we had to find them. And so we did a huge casting. We auditioned 600 kids all over the Arctic Circle, and then brought 60 kids to the Eastern Arctic to do a series of workshops. And part of that too, there was all these Indigenous teachers. So we had these workshops, and they were all Indigenous teachers, except for an acting teacher that came from the South. And so the kids learned drum dancing and throat singing and a lot of Inuit mask work and traditional Inuit arts, because a lot of those have been lost in Inuit communities, remote Inuit communities, so that at the end of the experience, all of those kids were flying back. These are all flying communities. So fly back to their small communities with knowledge, and with new knowledge that they could pass on. And at the end of the week, we said, by the way, if you want to audition for the film, you can. So the film often became the kind of byproduct and something so that even if the kids who didn't get in the movie, they would get something out of that experience. And then we also made sure that the first people that saw the film were Indigenous communities. So we did a huge release of the film. We raised $250,000 and did a big tour of the film to Indigenous communities all across the country that are remote and don't have theaters, so that kids could see versions of themselves as heroes on screen. It had everything a first-time filmmaker shouldn't have. It was, the weather, animals, actors that have never acted before, different languages, sports, stunts. It was pretty much, everything you don't want. But it also made it super exciting. And I think one of the big challenges too was making sure, because we were dealing with sensitive subject matter, we wanted to make sure always that the kids who were the actors in the film were supported, because they're first-time actors, but they also, because they're from Indigenous communities in the North, they also were affected very much by the same issues, and with the same issues that the kids in the story are. So when we were dealing with scenes that were sensitive, we made sure we had social workers on hand, or we are constantly talking to a couple of organizations, Indigenous-led organizations, that were making sure we were always protecting the mental health of the young actors. So that was something that not every film has to think about. And it was something we were very conscious of. I still remember too, though, the during one of the workshops before we went into the film, a young boy got up and he said, it was during a feedback nearing the end of the workshop, and he said, I've lost my best friend, my girlfriend, my cousin, and the entire front lineup of my hockey team to suicide. And he said, this needs to stop, and this film has the power to do that. And all of the other kids in the circle, like 30 kids, all come together and stood up and started screaming, "New start, new start." And just to be witness to that moment was so powerful. And I feel grateful for the opportunity to be part of a moment in history that we ended up using that and putting part of that into the movie. And so the journey of making the film also was so interactive, like the way that the kids and the actors and everyone associated with the film impacted it and affected it. And it wasn't directing a film in a normal way where I'm the boss and everyone else has to listen. It was really organic and collaborative. It's hard. I feel like I wish that somebody else was, the kids in the movie were speaking that, because I think, something I've learned about working on this film is that Indigenous people should be speaking for themselves. And so the thing that I hope is that I hope that it can inspire young Indigenous people in your country to believe in themselves if they don't already. And I hope that and to give themselves permission. It was one of the things that one of my Indigenous co-producers said. One of the challenges is for young people to, even if their parents are struggling or their community is struggling, to give themselves permission to seek joy. So I hope for that. And I also hope that for the rest of the country, if they're not aware of the Indigenous issues in Australia and New Zealand, that they become aware and become supportive of giving platforms for Indigenous voices.